Hammers are strong. Hammers are resilient. Hammers build up. Hammers tear down. Hammers fix. Hammers restore. Hammers protect. Hammers provide. Hammers do hard things. Hammers are put to work. Our mission is to equip men with the tools to serve themselves so they can best serve others. We seek to create a community of men who are lions, lambs, and servant leaders. We strive to forge men into hammers who contend for faith and truth in all things and are empowered to build up and bless other people always. Are you on mission? Are you an asset or a liability? Are you making an impact where you live, work, and play? Be a hammer, not a nail. Welcome to the Hammer Forged Life podcast with our founder and host, Jake Dicus.
So for today's episode, we have a special guest. Men, let me introduce you all to Mr. Ben Davies. Ben is a Marine Corps infantry veteran who served for 4 years, consisting of a UDP to Japan and a combat deployment to Afghanistan. After leaving the Marine Corps, Ben earned his bachelor's in education, but during his final semester, he would become a volunteer firefighter where Ben would soon discover his passion. After deciding to switch gears from education to pursuing a career in the fire service, Ben would put himself through the fire academy and upon graduation would find employment with the City of Newburgh Fire Department in North Carolina. Ben would quickly move up the ranks and now serves as a company officer within the department, functioning in many areas from fire suppression, EMS, technical rescue, and an instructor, hoping to pass his knowledge to the next generation of fire service. Outside of his career, Ben is a dedicated and loyal family man to his wife Stephanie and his children Kinsley, Riley, and Liam. Today, Ben will share his story, the lessons he's learned along the way, and everything else in between. It is a great honor to formally introduce you all to not only a friend from afar, but a man I also call brother, Mr. Ben Davies. One of the things that's always intrigued me about you specifically is you've done a lot in your life and you've had to overcome a lot. And a large part of your life had to do with you serving our country, which I'm very, very grateful for. So why don't you share with us and everyone else, just before we get into the military and post-military, what was life like for you as a young man? What were some things that went well? What are some of the adversities that you had to overcome? And just take us through what it was like living in a small town in Ohio.
Yeah, small town is an understatement. So I'm born and raised in Genoa, Ohio, which probably people in Ohio don't even know where that is. The biggest city close to me would have been Toledo. And then even like 45 minutes from where I grew up is Detroit, Michigan. Where I grew up is literally like look left, cornfields, look right, cornfields, up, down. There's just cornfields everywhere.
Just cornfields.
Just cornfields. I'm the youngest of 5 kids, and both my parents, my whole life, have been in ministry in one way or another. My dad started and pastored a church all through my time at home, and then my mom served in ministry at that church. In high school, she actually started preaching at a different church in town because it's a small town, and I guess it's hard to find pastors, and their pastor left. And my mom was like, yeah, I'll do that. So grew up in the church, going to church every Sunday, and anytime there was a guest speaker in town, they stayed at our house. And so I was around that my entire upbringing. So like I said, youngest of 5. I have one sister, or my sister closest in my age. She's only 2 years older than me. Wanted nothing to do with me when I was little. I was probably annoying. And then my next sibling was my older brother, who was like 6 years older than me. He didn't want anything to do with me because he was 6 years older than me. So I spent a lot of my early years kind of hanging out by myself, just I grew up on my parents rented a farmhouse from one of the farmers in our town. And I mean, I look back on it now and I even at the time I loved it, but I look back now and I'm like, dude, I'm so glad I had that upbringing because I had like thousands of acres of farmland and woods and creeks to go play in. And that's what I did most of my childhood. Um, so that's where I grew up. Uh, my dad's church also had a private Christian school that they started. It, as you can imagine, in a tiny town, then opening a private Christian school, it's even tinier. So I don't think we ever had more than like 50 students max, and that was kindergarten through 12th grade. So I went to that school kindergarten through 12th grade. Probably my junior high school years really starting to resent it, especially lack of opportunities for, sports or anything like that. You would think that, well, maybe you wouldn't think. I mean, there's that old saying that pastors' kids are the worst. But you would think growing up in that environment, like I would have been pretty squared away. And it's like, no, I wasn't. I was a turd just like everybody else.
So you mentioned you grew up, super small town, cornfields everywhere. Siblings didn't want to have anything to do with you, but you were growing up in a very Christian household. Dad's a pastor, mom's a pastor. And I hear stories all the time about kids or teenagers who grow up in these small towns, like there's nothing to do except for to get into trouble. So I was going to ask you, was that something that you found yourself getting into a lot, even though you had a strong Christian household?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Now, I would say in my early years, like getting into trouble was just like getting into some shenanigans, I remember at one point I don't know, I'm maybe 6, 7 years old. Like the farmer had this chicken coop. I always used to climb on the roof and play on. And like one day I just like decided to break all the windows out of it, like just stupid stuff. Now, granted, as I got older, the getting into trouble got a little more serious and stupid. But yeah, I mean, there's nothing to do, especially like my town, dude. When I was growing up, I think there was a stoplight and a caution light. And I think now they might have 2 stoplights and that caution light.
Wow. So you're genuinely from one of those one stoplight towns.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, wintertime in Northwest Ohio, there's even less to do. Like in the summertime, you had the swimming quarry was open, or you could go ride your bikes or something, but in the wintertime, there's literally nothing to do but, I guess, get into some mischief and trouble.
So got into trouble, talked about when you were younger, the chicken coop story, which I love. And then you got into around your teenage years in high school. So kind of take us from there. Like, what was high school like for you? Did you maintain your shenanigans? Did you kind of mature up and get a level head? Like, where were you at during high school?
Like, early years, freshman, sophomore years of high school, I probably had not changed much. I was just same immature little kid, like not necessarily doing anything too crazy. But my school was so different from what like someone who went to public school would think of too. I would go to I wouldn't go to a classroom and then moved in other classrooms. Like I went to like this learning center where I had basically a cubicle and you would do your work at your own pace. So basically, when it's on you, like if you worked hard all day and finished your work, you didn't have homework. So early on, I still, I was still goofing off. So like I probably had homework every day, but despite the fact that we didn't have a lot of opportunity for sports, we did have track and field and we had a basketball team. So probably my junior year, probably the summer between my sophomore and my junior year is where I really started like, man, I want to get into shape and I want to play sports. Obviously it's like, I'd like a girlfriend, one of the 4 people in my town. That summer I really I was a chubby kid too. So like, I went stupid. And like that whole summer ran miles and miles on country roads in sweatsuits and trash bags, to get into shape, which worked. I mean, the next year I looked like a totally different person. And so then, man, moving forward, for the most part, the rest of my high school days, like track is what I like centered my identity around. I really enjoyed basketball, but we had a crap team, and I liked track better because if I won or lost, it was on me.
So I have two questions for you. Number one, after you lost all that weight, did you capture the attention of one of the four girls?
Uh, I think so. I mean, in hindsight, but dude, I was also like this nervous Nelly kid who probably never really talked to them. So probably later on, I would hear like, "Oh yeah, so and so did really like you." I'm like, didn't know.
Second question is, so my graduating class was about 200. What was yours? 3? 4. Wow. And I was just joking.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. Graduated in the top 25% of my class.
That's a very easy statistic to hit in your case. So we talked about earlier that PKs or pastors' kids are known to be trouble, destructive, maybe not even be true believers. Did you have any crisis of faith when you were coming up? Did you adhere to what you'd been taught by your family and your upbringing? Like what was your faith like, and what challenges did you have growing up in that type of household?
So I would say, I wouldn't say I had a crisis of faith. That came later. But I have often said that, um, that growing up in that, it was just what we did, like it was just normal. Like there was this is just what our family does, like it almost, I would equate it almost to like doing things out of tradition.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that even though like all growing up, I had a very good knowledge of like the Bible and stuff, because I went to this private Christian school and my parents were pastors. I think that my like personal relationship did not come until later. So, which I've lost. I've often said in the past before is that like growing up in that way, my parents had relationship. Their relationship became my religion.
Wow, that's powerful. I'm sure we'll get into the crisis and stuff in a little bit, but so we're up through high school. You graduated class of 4, which is wild to think
Yeah.
about. At what point and what compelled you to enlist into the military? Was it immediately after you graduated? Was there time in between? Just take us through that space of time and just sort of where your head was at and what motivated you to eventually enlist, and we'll go from there.
Right. Yeah. So, think, I think really probably same time frame that I really got into sports. Um, junior, senior year, it was on my mind. Like I had thought heavily that I would, maybe I'll join the military. I grew up in like my dad's prior service Navy, my one grandfather's prior service Navy, my other grandfather's prior service Army. By this point, my brother had already listed in the Marine Corps. He was a reservist, so he was still, at home. And then probably it must have been my senior year. My sister also enlisted in the Marine Corps. So I had a lot of military around me. So it was always an option. Like I always danced with it. I wasn't fully sold on it, and I wasn't fully against it. But honestly, so right out of high school, I actually applied to a local community college. And so I was going to just go get my associates because I didn't really know what else to do. And then I guess my hope was that in the process of getting my associate's degree, I'd kind of figure out what I wanted to do along the way. So that got so far to the point that I had registered for all my classes, and I was set up to start classes like in the next 2 weeks or something. I was at the community college. I was walking from like the administration's building to go over to the security office to get my parking pass. And I just stopped in the middle of the parking lot And I called my mom and I was like, hey, I'm not doing this. I'm going to go down to the recruiter's office and enlist.
So it was kind of like a spontaneous decision in a way.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, like it had been on my mind, but
Mhm.
I think really what kind of was the final straw that put it to bed was I had this sense that if I didn't join, I would regret it.
Mm. So with all the men that I've known over the years that have enlisted and served our country, which I'm very, very grateful for all of them, regardless of the reason, it seems like there's one of a few reasons that men enlist, or women too, and it's legacy, which you kind of hit on, like my dad, my dad's dad, my dad's dad's dad, my uncle, like they all served. So I just want to carry on that family tradition of serving. So there's that piece. There's also the piece of just not knowing what they want to do. They've graduated. They don't know if they want to go to college. If they did, they don't know what they want to major in. They don't know what they want to do for a career, so they join the military. And then there's this other piece where it's essentially I keep finding myself getting into trouble. And so I'm going to join the military to get my head on straight.
Mm.
Do any of those resonate with you? Because it seems like you have a sense of legacy with your family being prior service in different capacities, but you also have this sort of uncertainty of wanting to follow through with community college and knowing what the future holds. So, which resonates with you?
Yeah. So I would say the legacy thing, I don't even know if that crossed my mind. Like, obviously, there was a knowledge that it was there, but I didn't feel any duty to join due to that legacy. Um, I think that honestly, what it really came down to is one, and I looking back at it, I almost think that this was subconscious. Like, I don't really think I was actively thinking about this in the moment, but I was not in bad trouble yet, but I was in situations that could have put me in very bad trouble. And so
Mm,
I think subconsciously, I was like, I need to get out of here. And then, the last point you had of like, you know, people are uncertain of what they wanted to do. I had no idea what I wanted to do. This was just the thing that I wanted to do more than the other things. So I wouldn't even say that there was a, like, I've heard people talk about like, man, I felt this, call of duty and sense of honor. And it's like, there was none of that with me. Like, um, I just was like, I think this would be a cool thing to do. And also, if I don't do it, I feel like I'll regret it.
yeah.
And I probably need to get out of some of the situations I'm in. And this is a one-way ticket to do that.
So, only if you're comfortable. And I was going to ask, are you comfortable sharing maybe a bird's eye view of some of those situations?
Yeah. I mean, I'll do a bird's eye view. Um, man, I just, so like I said, youngest, right? By the time I was in high school, and I don't say this to be negative towards like my parents at all, because I had really great parents, God-fearing, loving people, you know, everything pretty much that I knew biblically growing up came from them. But I think honestly, by the time I was in high school, they were kind of tired. They had 5 other kids that they, had put through this process. And also on the surface, like I didn't look like I was getting in trouble or look like I was going to. Like I did a very good job of hiding the things that I was doing. So like, I don't know, they didn't really check up on me. They didn't really ask me what I was doing or where I was going or who I was hanging out with. But ultimately, I was hanging out with some rough kids who, from early on in high school were drinking and getting drunk and um probably hanging out with some females that I shouldn't have, and then definitely hanging out with some females that I shouldn't have. And, some of these relationships, it was like, man, like I'm gonna get killed eventually if I keep doing what I'm doing. So it was just like I said, I didn't think about any of that in the moment, but I do think something subconsciously was like, dude, you gotta get out of here.
Yeah, it's almost like you had this inherent sense of knowledge where maybe you haven't done anything super wild yet, but you knew that there was a potential that things would get progressively worse and wanted to find yourself out of that situation. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, and I think honestly, mostly it was like hey, you are doing some really stupid things and nobody's found out yet, but when they do, you're going to be in some deep stuff.
Mm.
And so I almost think it was like, I think subconsciously I knew I had to get out of those situations. And I also think that subconsciously I knew that if I stayed there, I wouldn't be able to get myself out.
Mm.
Like I needed something to pull me away.
That makes a lot of sense. So you pulled the trigger, you enlisted. After you signed that paper, what was going through your head? What emotions were you feeling during that time?
Um, I obviously like there's anxiety that comes with the unknown. So a little bit of like, your normal anxiousness, nervousness, but mostly I was excited. I I mean, like I said earlier, I grew up like running through fields and in the woods, pretending to be, a commando or whatever. So when I enlisted, I was like, hey, I'm going infantry. Like this is, if I'm going to join the military, I'm going to do what people think the military do. So there was, and at the time there was still an active war going on. So I think there's definitely some reservations about that. Maybe not necessarily from me, but from friends and family. But I'm still pretty stubborn. So like when I get something in my mind, like I'm going to do it.
Yeah. So I don't see this as the case, but I have to ask, was there any resistance from loved ones when it came to you, especially with an active war going on? Was there any resistance from loved ones, from family, of you signing up and going to the Marine Corps?
My family, no. I mean, there was definitely like, I mean, I was a little turd, like rebellious kid. Not like, well, I was rebellious, but they didn't know that out, looking from the outside looking in. But they definitely knew like Ben does not do well with authority and people telling him what to do. And so like, especially my siblings who were in the military were like, dude, you're in for an awakening. I was like, oh, I'm ready. I can do this. Um, so my family, no, my family was very supportive. Even like I, was walking through the college parking lot, called my mom. I was like, hey, I'm not doing college. I'm going to go enlist today. Like the only thing she said to me was like, if that's what you think you need to do, then okay. So my family, no, there were definitely people in my life, mostly the ones who shouldn't have been in my life, the people that I needed to separate from that were like, oh, well, why would you do that? Oh, we don't want you to leave, blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, it's a little late now. I signed that line.
All right. So you signed that line and you enlisted and you were getting prepared to go. Okay. So from the process of, from the time at which you signed to the time you actually left, what was that time period? Was it like months? Was it weeks? Was it months? Months.
Yeah. I graduated in 2010, and for a year, I just kind of did random jobs, hung out with the people I shouldn't have been hanging out with. So yeah, 2011, September 2011 is when I enlisted. And at the time there's this thing called the delayed entry program. So you go and you're enlisted, but you're basically waiting for your ship out date to go to boot camp. So I did the delayed entry program for probably like 3 or 4 months, and I was supposed to be getting a ship out date, and it just did not come. So I finally like asked my recruiter about it, and he told me in the moment that, well, the issue is that you want an infantry contract, and we don't have any infantry contracts right now. So if you want to go to boot camp, you need to sign a different contract. That was not going to happen. I didn't want to do anything else. And then in hindsight, like, after years later, like realizing like, oh, they're trying to meet a quota and they have too many infantry contracts. So he told me, hey, basically, if you want to enlist in the infantry, it's going to be a long wait, or you can take another contract and join the military or join the Marine Corps. And so I got off the phone with him. I called my brother and my sister, who were both in, and explained that situation to him. And my brother was like, basically like, that's bull crap. You need to call his boss and tell him what he told you and say, Like if infantry is what you want, like tell him like, hey, find me an infantry contract or I'm joining at all. So I did that. I went above my recruiter's head. I called the gunnery sergeant who was in charge of him, and I said just that. I said, hey, Staff Sergeant so-and-so just called me, said there's no infantry contracts, is trying to talk me into a engineer contract, and I'm just letting you know that unless it's infantry, I'm not joining. He said, oh, okay, well, I'll see what I can do. He hung up the phone, and my recruiter called me back probably 30 minutes later and said, we found you an infantry contract.
So you mentioned earlier of the rebellion, of the not really taking to authority figures that very well. And so I'm curious as to what life was like when you started boot camp. So you're in boot camp, you're this young man who was finding himself into trouble before boot camp, not liking authority. What was life like?
So I love people who come talk to me and they're like, yeah, I thought about joining the military, but I don't know, like boot camp, if somebody got in my face like that, like I'd fight them. And it's like, no, you wouldn't. You absolutely would not. It doesn't matter if you respect authority, like authority, hate authority. When you get there and you have these drill instructors who, it's probably softer and gentler now, unfortunately, but
That's a
at the
different story.
time could like mess you up. Like it didn't matter if you didn't like authority. You were going to do what they said because you were in fear. So I, even if I didn't like authority, I was like, oh, I see how this game's played, and it's a non-win game for me. So I better.
I would assume that you complied very quickly.
Yes, very quickly.
So take us through boot camp, because I'm a civilian. I've always had great respect for our military. But you see the stuff on the movies, and I hear that it's way different than the movies. So just take us all through what life was like in boot camp for you.
Okay, so going to boot camp, you hop on a bus, right? I hopped on a bus. I went to Cleveland. I flew from Cleveland down to somewhere in South Carolina. I don't know if we landed on Parris Island. I doubt it. Anyways, get on another bus, drive on to Parris Island, put your heads down, right? Some of the stuff in the movies is true. Like everybody puts their head down. You pull up to this building late at night, the bus door opens, and it's just a drill instructor coming on and screaming at you. And you're just, from that moment, like your life is regimented by them. So it's like, you move here, you stand here, you sit here, you eat this. I think a lot of people, especially who have like no affiliation with the military, think that they're all like, everyone's a war fighter. And it's like, no, that's not really what it is. And so boot camp isn't this 3 months of learning how to fight a war. Mostly it's about breaking people down and building them back up how they want you to be, like getting you to conform to the image of what a Marine should be. Instant willing obedience to all orders, how you make your bed, how you how you look physically in your uniforms. Like it is so regimented down to like the nitty grittiest details. And they all serve a purpose. I was never a drill instructor. I would never want to be, but everything that you do throughout that whole process is geared towards helping with something else. So even to the point of like, when you're, the only time you really sit in a chair in boot camp is when you're eating chow or when you're in a classroom. Other than that, you're sitting crisscross applesauce on the ground. And the whole point of that is, hey, in phase 2 of boot camp, when we go to the rifle range, you're going to have to be comfortable in this seating position. So it's not all about like guns and fighting and stuff. Obviously there are phases of that because kind of the big Marine Corps motto is every Marine is a rifleman. So every Marine is going to learn that aspect as far as like how to fire a weapon, how to clean a weapon, things like that. But for the most part, it's like, it's really just drilling into your brain that, you are not just Joe Blow, Ben Davies anymore. Like you are a Marine, you are a member of a bigger thing, and what you do affects everyone. So for instance, in boot camp, you are not allowed to use the word I. So you cannot walk up to a drill instructor and say, I need to use the head, which is the restroom. You would get destroyed if you did that. You refer to yourself in the third person as a part of a bigger body. So you would walk up to them and say, senior drill instructor so-and-so, recruit Davies has to use the head, or request permission to use the head. So, I mean, a drill instructor would have much more insight into all the things that play into one another, but basically it's just, it is reorganizing, re-regimenting your life and they are getting you to fit the mold of what a Marine should look like.
So they have the intent, and there's a reason behind everything. And just like you alluded to, you might not know the reason as the recruit, but they have an intent and a purpose behind every single thing that they're having you do, with an emphasis put on unity and camaraderie amongst the brotherhood, correct?
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it.
One of the things I'm curious about is you show up as a recruit with all these other men and women, but just focusing more on the male piece, you're in boot camp with all these men, and there's testosterone, there's a sense of competition, there's guys out there who probably feel like they have a chip on their shoulder and have something to prove. What was the environment like amongst the other men that you were going through boot camp with?
I would say, honestly, that the kind of chip on their shoulder, egotistical dudes are the exception. They're not the rule. At least in my boot camp experience, like the members of my platoon, it was kind of like, hey, it's us against them.
Wow.
The drill instructors, like we
Okay.
got to look out for each other. So, and you had your blown up, egotistical, I'm better than everybody else. I'm going to graduate top of our class people. But honestly, most of those dudes, they get knocked down a peg. Like that's, I would say that the type of people that drill instructors want are confident, but not cocky. So if you're cocky, you're going to get brought down because, I mean, they really want you to think you're nothing.
So explain that tension. I know we're getting a little sidetracked here, but I just think this is a really great talking point. I think a lot of men can get something from it. But explain that tension or that dichotomy between being confident and arrogant, confident and cocky. What does that look like?
So to me, the difference between, cockiness and confidence, right? At least in a lot of areas that I've seen. Now, sometimes you have that cocky person who's like all talk, no bite. They can't back up what they're saying. But a lot of times you do have that cocky person who's extremely good at their job. And that's where their cockiness comes from. So what separates the two for me is I have had leaders who were extremely cocky. They were good at their job and they enjoyed belittling people because they were not as good, or they liked calling people out in front of other people to show, oh, this person they don't know what they're talking about, but I do. The confident person is also extremely good at their job, but they have a willingness to keep. And they're more selfless. They are more about the whole platoon or squad or company looking good than they are just them looking good.
It's almost like the difference between someone being good at what they do and being selfish and pursuing it for their own namesake or ill-gotten gain, and others who have that servant leadership mentality where they want to bring up the rest of the team.
Yeah,
while
100%.
being very good at what they do.
100%.
So we get through boot camp. What's next? What's that next phase look like?
So boot camp ends. At that point, all those people in your platoon, for the most part, they're going all sorts of different ways, because in your boot camp platoon, you have people who are going to be every different type of MOS, which is like your military job, right? So after boot camp, the path that I went on was I went to Camp Geiger in North Carolina, which is actually right here outside of Jacksonville. And that is where the School of Infantry is. So the next phase of my career was 2 months in the School of Infantry, where you're getting broken up into your specific infantry fields, and you are learning the ins and outs of whatever your specialty is.
What was going through your head during all of this time from boot camp to that MOS, where you're learning more or less specifically infantry. Was it just one of those things to where you were just so honed in on what was in front of you that you didn't find the time to really feel and experience your emotions or really introspectively think about different things? Or did you have those moments of just introspection and just kind of questioning? So, just sort of what are you wrestling with at this time, if anything, or were you just hyper focused on the task at hand?
I I'd say hyper focused. I don't think, especially in boot camp, I don't think there was really much, like sitting there and like really thinking about like being introspective. Um, Boot camp for me, which my brother told me to do this, and it served me well. My brother told me, he said, when you get to boot camp, he said, you cannot look at the big picture of 3 months. He said, if you're thinking about 3 months, you're going to want to quit every single day. He said, think about chow to chow. So that's what I did. I'd go to sleep, or I'd wake up in the morning, I'd go to breakfast, and then all I would think about was making it to lunch. And then after lunch, all I would think about was making it to dinner. And it was the best advice I ever got about how to handle boot camp, because you literally, if you look at the big picture, it's so much time. And especially when you first get there, you're getting so destroyed by these drill instructors that if you look at big picture, you're like, I can't do this. And then in the same token, you have the drill instructors who will legitimately walk around and tell you like the fastest way off this island is to graduate. So yeah, it was in boot camp. It was like, what's the next task? Complete the next task, move to the next task. What's the next? And that was it.
Paying attention to everything that's in front of you.
Yeah.
So, at what point during this process did you know or knew that the time was coming to where you would actually go on deployment?
So, after School of Infantry, which again, I mean, it's just a 2 month process of learning your craft. There's nothing too crazy about it. You have sergeants and staff sergeants there kind of babysitting you, right? Just like drill instructors were, but they're not drill instructors. So you know, they're not as intense. They're there to teach you. So I did that, 2 months, pretty easy going. You get the weekends off. So you can go walk around Jacksonville with your high and tight, and everybody knows you're a boot because you're walking down the sidewalk with a backpack. Um, but after that, everybody gets assigned to their units. So I was assigned, my first unit was 3-9, which is also here in Jacksonville. It's on Camp Lejeune. So we literally graduated from School of Infantry, got on a bus, and we went to the battalion headquarters and we checked into our unit. I had probably been in my unit for a couple months before we knew for certain that we were getting deployed to Afghanistan.
How were you feeling knowing that you were going to Afghanistan where there is an active war going on?
And you're so indoctrinated by this point, especially being a brand new like boot Marine. You're so indoctrinated that like heck yeah, like this is the prize. Like this isn't a scary thing. Like this is what we're working for. So I don't think at any point up until like literally the day of my deployment was there any like fear or thought of like, oh man, I might not come back from this. When we got told that, hey, we're going to do a workup and we're going to deploy back to Afghanistan, like we were all of us new guys were stoked.
Your boots hit the ground in Afghanistan. Does the mindset shift a little bit when it becomes a reality? Just take us through that.
Yeah. So honestly, I think the day that I loaded onto the bus to go to the airport to deploy to Afghanistan is where it was like, oh, this is real. Like it's here now. And we're going to a combat zone and probably everybody on this bus isn't coming back. That's where it really sank in. Definitely like, can produce some anxiety, some fear. But still you're so indoctrinated with like, you're a war fighter, right? That you're still excited. So like, I know it's dangerous, but this is still what I've been training for. This is what I want to do. So load buses, go get an airplane. fly to Kyrgyzstan, stay there for 2 weeks, fly to Afghanistan. When we first got to Afghanistan, obviously, I mean, we'd been fighting in Afghanistan for well over a decade by then. So there's a huge established base. We fly into this huge military airport, and we stayed on the big base there called Camp Leatherneck for I think 2 weeks also, and it's like an acclimation period. Um, Leatherneck did not seem scary at all because it's huge. Like you, yeah, I mean you're just like unaware of any violence going on outside the wire because you're literally like basically in a city. So we stayed there for 2 weeks, acclimated. All of our, higher up command got their orders where we were going. And so from Leatherneck, maybe, half of another company, we got sent out to this patrol base, which is obviously much smaller. And that's where we spent the first 4 months of my deployment was on this like tiny patrol base, where we basically just, man, you wake up, you eat breakfast, you work out. If it's your day to go on patrol, you go on patrol. If nothing happens, then nothing happens, and you come back. It can get monotonous, honestly, if you don't have like a very specific missions that you're fulfilling. Which also, like at this point, this is late 2012 into 2013. Like the war had died down a lot. So like my deployment by no means was a Fallujah or a Ramadi or something like that. Most of my deployment was monotonous with like a very small portion of like, hey, this is crazy and exciting, back to being monotonous.
So you mentioned something earlier, and hopefully I'm not messing up the timeline, but you mentioned a crisis of faith. When did that happen, and how was your faith throughout all these transitions?
I would say that I still, like, if you would have asked me at this time, even during Afghanistan, like, hey, are you a Christian? Do you believe in God? Do you believe in Jesus? I would have been like, yeah, 100%. That's just, what I believe. Was I practicing any of it? Absolutely not. I stopped going to church completely after boot camp. Like, and I went in boot camp because you got 2 hours away from the drill instructors on Sunday.
Okay.
So there was no practicing of it. I definitely wasn't in my word. If I was praying, it was like, Lord, please don't let this person mess me up today for this. There was definitely no, like, I was not an active practicing Christian or in relationship with Christ at the time.
So when did that turn around for you? Was that still while you were serving in the military, or did that come afterwards?
No, so that was still in the military. But honestly, so like I was very stagnant, right, in my first few years in the military. And during my Afghan deployment, it wasn't really until I came back from Afghan that I kind of had this crisis of faith where I legit was like, I don't know if any of this is real anymore.
Okay, we'll get into that. I want us to stick with the timeline. So you're in Afghanistan. Things kind of seem monotonous. You're doing the same things every single day, just about, unless you have a mission. Did you encounter any moments where you actually had the thought where you would not come back from this? I mean, what was that like?
So my during the first few months of my deployment, while we were on that smaller patrol base, me and other members of my platoon were assigned to a MAP, which is mobile patrol. And so we were in vehicles. We were doing vehicle mounted patrols, which also included taking our company officer to like the district governor's house, and he would have meetings with that district governor and come back. That whole time I was lead Vic driver. So I don't think it was something that I was actively always nervous about. However, I always had the thought in my mind, like, if we hit an IED, it's probably going to blow me up because I'm the first Vic. Fortunately, never hit an IED, but there was one time, which, I mean, looking back now, it's like, I think God was just looking out for us. But we had taken our CO to go meet with this district governor. And it was only supposed to be like a short meeting. Like we were supposed to be there like an hour, hour and a half tops, and then come back. So we were supposed to be leaving that place at like 1500, 3 in the afternoon to head back to our patrol base. And something came up, meeting went long. We ended up not leaving until 1700, 5 o'clock. Well, in that time, a convoy had gone by us heading to our patrol base on the exact same road that we would have been driving, and they smoked an IED. It blew up the first day. So
Oh, goodness.
that was the first like, oh shit moment. Like if we would have left on time, that would have been our truck.
Wow.
Fortunately, I don't think anybody in that vehicle died. I mean, obviously there were some injuries, but I mean, I think about it now, and it's like, man, there's so many different factors that play into that. Like, what, how much of it did they hit? Where were they centered on it when it detonated? Like, you change some of those variables, and it could have been a different outcome.
Wow. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that God was definitely looking out for you guys. I never knew that. That's wild. So, at what point was it that you realized that you've done your time? Like you were not going to re-enlist, you wanted to go back home. What did that look like for you? What drew you to that conclusion, that decision?
Yeah. So post Afghanistan, right? My unit comes back from Afghanistan. I was in 3-9 was the unit, and they disbanded. So prior to this, while I was in 3-9, while I was in Afghanistan, I had every intention of re-enlisting. I loved my unit. I loved the dudes I was with. I was fully set on re-enlisting. Well, we come back and they disband us, and they basically take your family that you've now built and they separate you to the winds. So we got spread throughout the Marine Corps to all these different units. I went to a unit called S1E3, which I will go on record to say is the worst infantry unit in the Marine Corps. I hated that place. And honestly, I got there, and that's when I really, that's kind of where my I don't think God exists. Like, I'm just kind of, if I was doing stupid stuff before, like I get to this point and I just start kind of doing whatever the heck I feel like doing, which is not the greatest choice. But so I get sent to this new unit, this brotherhood that I formed with these guys, especially the senior guys, right? So when you first come to the Marine Corps and you're a boot, like you're nothing. You're like, gum on the bottom of the senior guys' shoes. But once you've deployed and you've seen some stuff, then you're it. I mean, you're a brother, you're a member of the family. So we finally get that with these guys, and the Marine Corps breaks us up. We go to this different unit. Other people go other places. So I go to 1A, awful unit. The leadership there was terrible. Nobody looked out for each other. Everybody cared about getting a pat on their back. And that is where, like, I left Afghanistan extremely motivated, and in a matter of like 4 or 5 months of being at 1-8, all that motivation was gone. I was like, screw this place, screw the Marine Corps. I'm absolutely not re-enlisting. Like, I don't want anything to do with this. I want to get out.
It's amazing that you can be a part of a brotherhood that you care about, that you would take a bullet for, with a common mission and a common goal, looking out for one another, and then go from something that powerful to something that is the complete opposite, which is, it seems like what you experienced.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So going to 1-8 with the poor leadership and brotherhood and everything that was there, decided that you were not going to re-enlist. What happens from there?
So when I got to 1-8, I still had a little under 2 years left on my contract. So I'm at 1-8. My faith is pretty much gone at this point. Like, I'm not practicing it. I don't even really know if it's true. I kind of just become like, I hate to say it, but I kind of just become like a shitbag Marine. like just doing what I got to do to get by. And then that unit, we had a UDP, which is a unit deployment program. So you go to like, some people do UDPs to like Africa. You go to different countries where we have a permanent military presence, and you stay there for 6 months. I went to Japan, which some people think sounds really great. I hated it. It was terrible. Now, granted, I was disgruntled, so I didn't take a lot of the opportunities that were there. I have a lot of buddies who like went snorkeling and got dive certified and like did a bunch of cool hikes. And I was just disgruntled, and so I didn't do any of that. I drank a lot. So we were there for 6 months. And there was a 2-week period during that deployment where we went to the Philippines. And we were training there for like 2 weeks. And so to set this story up too, my gunnery sergeant in this new company I was in was a very loud, very boisterous Southern Baptist pastor. And like every time you saw him, you need to get your life right. You need to be serving Jesus. Like, and also like was also intimidating. He was like a 6'4" jacked black dude, like had this deep voice just telling you like, you better be serving Jesus. Well, at this time in my life, like I absolutely despised him. I hated him because I was like slowly becoming convinced like all of that's BS anyways. I hated that he crammed it down people's throats, and I wanted nothing to do with him, like despised it.
Let's back up. What was convincing you that it was all BS?
I think because I had not had like, I think I had all the knowledge, but I didn't have at any point in my life like this deep relationship with him. So I think a lack of relationship with him and just having the knowledge, I was like, man, all these things that I don't really like, all these crappy things are happening to me. Like, I think it's all bogus.
And so this 6'4", loud, boisterous Southern Baptist guy, your gunnery sergeant, correct?
Correct.
He is telling you need to get back at it. You need to get your head on right. You need Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
How did that impact you?
Oh, I hated it at first. Oh, I despised it. I could not stand that man. And he did it every formation. Like every time he had the company together, he was going to talk about Jesus. Like, and did not care what you thought of it. You were going to stand there and you're going to listen to him. So we're on deployment in Japan. We go to the Philippines for like a 2-week field op where we're like shooting, going to ranges, just different training drills. And at the time, just some of the stuff I had been into in my high school years were like weighing on me for some reason. And I was like sitting out on this guard post one night with my buddy who was not, didn't believe in anything, wasn't a Christian, nothing like that. But I just felt like, dude, I got to like tell somebody about some of this stuff I have done to like get it off my chest. And I always find it interesting that I didn't go to a Christian looking for someone who would accept me. So I told my buddy all this junk I'd done. And he basically was like, yeah, man, like people do shit that's, crappy. And like, are you still doing that stuff? I was like, well, no. And he's like, that's all that matters. And I don't know why, but for some reason, telling him about that and talking with him about that, I think softened some of the soil in my heart. Because it was not 3 nights later that another friend of mine who had a similar upbringing to me, like in the church, but now was like far from God. I was laying on my rack and he walked up and he kicked it and he was like, hey man, I think we should go to Gunny's prayer meeting tonight. And I laughed at him. I was like, because I thought he was messing with me. And he sat down on my rack and he's like, no, dude, like, I don't know why, but I really feel like we need to go. And I was like, all right, I'll go with you. And where kind of falling away from my faith and getting to the point that I was at was kind of a gradual, like easy slope. Falling back into it was like jumping off a cliff.
So you go to this prayer meeting. What happens?
And it was a men's group. It was just a men's devotional. I couldn't even tell you what he talked about, but he talked and we sat there and listened, and me and that buddy did not miss another one. All the crap that we had been doing that in the world's eyes was probably okay, but like to a Christian, probably isn't. Stop doing all that stuff. Like, it was a hard 180 for both of us in that moment. We did not miss another prayer meeting of his. We went to church every Sunday. He actually, that same buddy, he and I, when we got back to Lejeune, started going to DCI together.
Dude, that's incredible. That's an amazing story. And so, towards the tail end of your tenure with the military, the Marine Corps specifically, you had a crisis of faith, and then you had a renewed sense of faith through the testimony and the leadership of your gunnery sergeant. You started going to the prayer meetings, do a complete 180. You said it was like jumping off of a cliff, which I think is a great way to put that. How long was it from there that you actually got out?
So I was probably, hold on, I gotta think about when I went to Japan. I probably had 8 months left in the military when that happened. Maybe a little more, maybe a year. I might have been right at a year.
Do you feel like that had any impact on your mindset? Because before that, you were very disgruntled, probably had a little bit of resentment, bitterness, and then you have this renewed sense of faith. What did that do for your mindset? What did that do for your headspace with those last 8 months?
Honestly, as far as, so like in Japan, like my mentality, my attitude, everything really flipped around. Like, whereas before I was just really disgruntled, would kind of sit there and have a bitch fest with you for hours if we wanted to. Like, I was more positive. I would say that I was enjoying life, or I had joy brought back to my life. But as far as like, we get back to the States and like, how did that affect, just being a part of the unit? I almost couldn't really tell you, because I got back to the States and I immediately transitioned into this program that's like to help set you up to get out of the Marine Corps. So like my day to day, once I got back, I actually went to a like welding apprenticeship.
From there, you get out, you find a local church, you get plugged in with your buddy that took you to that prayer meeting. And so when you got out, was there a hard time transitioning back to civilian life? Did you pick right back up like nothing had ever changed? What was that experience like for you?
So the transition out was, it was definitely intimidating. It was scary. I mean, like, you're in the military, you're living on base, you don't have to worry about anything. You have a roof over your head, you're getting 3 meals a day, like everything's taken care of. And so, and by this point, I've begun dating my now wife. So we started dating. I had probably 6 months left in the Marine Corps. I had known her for a couple years, but we started dating with like 6 months left in the Marine Corps. And she knew I was getting out. And she made it very clear, like week 2 or 3 of us dating, that if my intention was to get out and move home, that we shouldn't be dating, because she wasn't going to leave because her family was here. So I was like, Ohio's not that great. So I got out and decided I was staying here, which made it even scarier because I had none of the support system I would have if I went home. Like, if I went home, I probably would have moved back into my parents' house, at least until I can figure out what the heck to do. But I wouldn't have had to worry about things. So like, I was excited to get out, but the moment I left that base in my car, it was like, I need to find a job and I need to find work.
So how did you cope with it all? I mean, there was this fear of not having the support system. going into sort of the unknown? Like, how did you push through? What was it that enabled you to have the strength and the courage to stay in the area and adjust to your new life?
Honestly, as cheesy as this may sound, um, I knew 2 weeks into dating my now wife that I was gonna marry. Within 2 weeks, like, obviously did not tell her this, but within 2 weeks, I was like, I'm gonna marry her."
So how'd you guys
Um,
meet?
so we just met through, like, mutual friends, basically. She was a waitress at, like, Texas Roadhouse here in town. A bunch of I mean, Marines go there all the time, but, so she had met people there who knew me. One of the guys in my unit started dating her sister, and so we hung out a lot together, but never, went on a date, nothing until, like I said, I was 6 months from getting out of the Marine Corps before we started dating. So we had just kinda met very, naturally just through friends and family, so, um, but yeah, so we knew each other. I met her in 2013. We didn't start dating until 2015.
Okay. And going back to what I asked earlier, because I sorry I interjected, but because I just had to know, uh, how did you cope? How did you deal with it all? All the change, all the lack of support. Like, how did you deal with that?
I mean, I think, like I said, like as cliche as it sounds, like I knew very early that like I'm gonna marry Stephanie, which also by this time, like Kinsley's 2 years old. So I'm gonna marry Stephanie. She has a daughter. These are people who are going to look to me to like provide and take care of them. So I kind of just have to disregard any feelings
Mm.
and just go to work, like find something. I have to do something. So I don't think I'd been out of the Marine Corps more than maybe a week and a half, and I got a job as a laborer, roofing, which was off.
So it was the reality of the responsibility that Stephanie didn't know, but you knew that you would eventually take on with eventually asking your hand in marriage and being the strong man that she and Kinsley needed. That was what kind of helped you to find that courage to make all those adjustments to face the change head on and keep trucking forward, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and dude, and it's like a perfect. It falls right in line with like Mark Driscoll talking about a young man is a pickup truck, and a pickup truck works best when it has a load.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, you're right. I was just a young, pickup truck, and I had this responsibility in the bed of my truck, and it was like, all right, well, let's go to work.
So inherently, that was your sense of purpose during that season of life. Whereas, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, because I don't want to misrepresent other guys in the military, but I feel as though a lot of military who transition into civilian life, one of the biggest struggles is a sense of community and purpose. And
Yeah.
you were able to walk right into that sense of purpose with knowing that Stephanie was the one for you and she had a 2-year-old daughter.
Yep. And on top of that, I mean, like you said, I was plugged into the church, so I had a community too. And that's like, honestly, I think that the two ingredients for success leaving the military is, I mean, you just said it, hit the nail on the head, but community and purpose. I think people get out, and they don't necessarily have a plan, and so they're lacking purpose, and then they go back home, and a lot of times, man, like while you're in the military, you almost think like nothing's changing back home, but like people are going on without you. They're learning like, oh, we don't, Ben wasn't the core of our friend group. Like life goes on. So you almost think they're like frozen in time, and you go back home and you're going to pick up right where you left off. And it's like, no, you're 4 years down the road and you've changed, and so have we. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think that I just was extremely fortunate and blessed that one, I already had that community established within the church. And two, like I said, 2 weeks into dating her, I was like, this is my purpose.
There's some other interesting things about you post-military. So earlier during your introduction, we mentioned about you getting your bachelor's in education. and then eventually that would lead you into the direction of the fire service. So let's talk about that. You go to school post-military, and then what?
Yeah, so I went. I got my associate's degree, like in-person classes here in town. There's a community college in Jacksonville. Did really well. Like I hate classrooms, and I really did not like school, but like graduated with honors. Um, so did really really well there. My original plan was to be a history teacher. I wanted to teach like high school history. That was what I wanted to do. So I get my associate's degree. I transfer to University of North Carolina, Wilmington. And I go there, I do my orientation, and the lady like tells me like, oh yeah, you want to be a history teacher? That's great. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to do 2 years to get your history degree, and then another 2 years to get your teaching license, which I didn't know at the time. I had only accounted for doing 4 years of college because that's what my GI Bill afforded me.
Mm.
When I found out I would have to be in college for another 4 years, I was like, well, that's not going to work. Like I have a family. I can't go to school and pay for it out of pocket and not be getting paid. And so I said, what's my other option? And they're like, well, you can do, elementary education or something like that. So I transitioned to elementary education, which ultimately I think, I think it definitely what it was meant to happen because I wasn't meant to be a teacher. But I think not teaching would have been a lot harder if I had gone the route that I wanted to, because in my mind, that's what I wanted to do. So anyways, I settled for elementary education, another 2 years at university, did that all online, graduating with honors. But I mean, within a couple semesters, I was like, I'm not really feeling this. And then I went and did my student teaching, and I was like, I'm really not feeling this now. Like, like if these were my kids, I would spank them. And so, yeah, I was in my last semester at university, and I walked into. We were at my mother-in-law's house. We were actually living with my mother-in-law at the time. And by this point, we were married. I walked into my mother-in-law's house, and she was watching, like, I don't know, Chicago Fire or something, something that now I gawk at, not gawk at, but I just am like, oh my gosh. But she was watching it, and I was like, I think that'd be really fun. And she was like, well, why don't you go do it? And I was like, why don't I go do it? And so I went down to my local volunteer fire department, and I was like, hey man, I'm really interested in this. Don't know anything about it, but it looks fun. And they're like, oh, okay, well, come back to the business meeting. We'll vote you on. You got to shave your beard, though. So I went home and I shaved my beard off, and then I started volunteering. And I mean, it was all downhill from there. I mean, I fell in love with it super quick. The volunteer department I was at, you have to be there like over a year, and then they'll sponsor you to go through the academy. I knew already I wanted to go through the academy, so I was like, whatever, I don't need you to sponsor me, I'll just pay for it. So I paid for it, made it through the academy, and then just got super fortunate with the city of New Bern. They were doing a hiring process in the last like 2 months of my academy, and I applied and got hired.
So it all makes sense now because you and I met a good bit ago for the first time. And when I first met you, you had this luscious, glorious, squared off beard. I always thought that you looked like, John Cooper from Skillet. I mean, it was a nice beard, man. And you liked rock music, and I put the two together. And then, years later, we would reconnect in person, and the beard was gone. And I was like, why do you do that? Because if I could grow something like that, I'm all in, bro, but I can't do it to save my life.
Yeah. Well, you can't wear a SCBA mask with a beard. It just won't seal right. So,
got it. It all makes sense now. And so you get on with the city of New Bern. What was it? So your first inclination was this Chicago Fire experience that you had with your mother-in-law, and you thought that would be fun. And then you actually get into the work. You get into becoming a legit firefighter. What was it that kept that passion, that desire to do this for the rest of your life? Did you see any similarities between the fire department and maybe what you experienced in the military that sort of, for lack of better term, stoked that fire in you to keep pursuing that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think that in the civilian world, the closest thing to Marines are firefighters. Sorry. Um, uh, where, so I contemplated, like police for a little while, but never acted on it because, I mean, when I started volunteering, and I fell in love with that. But the brotherhood and the sense of family within a fire department is insane. I mean, it's almost identical to what I felt in the military because honestly, whereas like, PD, they're in their cars, so they might hang out with their partner all day or one other cop. We live together. Like we live together a third of our life, basically. We eat together, we sleep in the same building, we're responding to calls in the same vehicles. Um, I just it was just another aspect of community to add to my life. Um, and as far as the work of the job, like it is an aggressive man's game or woman's game. Like aggressive firefighting is like nothing beats it, and it's it's very similar to being in the infantry where it's like, hey, my job is to go into a scary situation. But that excites me. And I'm going to train as hard as I can, uh, to make sure that I come through that situation, my crew comes through that situation, and the people that I'm serving come through that situation, or at least are offered the best chance of coming through it. So I don't know. I fell in love with the job immediately, and I'm just extremely passionate about it. And I'm not somebody who does something halfway. Like when my mind is made up on something, like I'm going to go for it with everything. There's no point in doing it if I'm going to be mediocre at it.
Whether it's your time in the Marine Corps or now in the fire service, how does one deal with tragedy? I'm sure that you've had to respond to calls that did not go as expected or were really hard to deal with. Mentally, how do you deal with those types of things?
Man, I think at the core of it all, or the foundation of how you deal with things, is your faith. If you have to have, for me, my strong foundation in my faith is what can help me, get through anything. Um, Along with that, I think communicating about those things. I mean, you think about, and I'll even equate it to the military. A lot of veterans who are going through things like like we said, they get out of the military, they go back home, they have nobody who has any idea about what they've been through, so they can't talk to those people. And it's like, I'm not. So for me, and I don't say that, I'm not trying to say this to be negative about it or anything, but like to me, like I don't necessarily need to go like talk to a therapist about something, but I need to talk to somebody. And I think a lot of veterans, man, we go back home and we're out of that community and those brothers who have been through the same thing, and we have no one to talk to. And I think that, so your first foundation is your faith. And I think the second kind of, if we're stacking on top of that, the second thing is like communication and talking about those situations with people who know what it's like. And that's like, I mean, you'll hear within the fire service, like the kitchen table. The kitchen table is an amazing place. We go there to train. We go there to vent. We go there to share our burdens. And it's true. I mean, if you have a hard call, the fact that you have these brothers and sisters around you who either went through the call with you or have been through similar calls, that you guys can just kind of vent and talk about it. I mean, that in and of itself is therapeutic.
So you mentioned the kitchen table, and I'm assuming that would be the same feeling as the expression of being in the trenches as is used in military, right?
Yeah. Well, maybe slightly different because to me, like being in the trenches is like while you're actually in it.
Okay.
The kitchen table is the safe place afterwards.
But there's something about, and you'd mentioned this, having those conversations specifically with someone who's been through it and understands.
Right. Yeah. So I guess, yeah. And, I mean, to tie back into like the trenches, like that's where you get close. Yeah. And so, yeah, the kitchen table and the firehouse, that's where you get close.
So Ben, I know we've covered a lot during our conversation, and I feel like we've only scratched the surface, and we could keep going and going and going. But I do want to make space for some call to actions. And so, firstly, what would be the primary advice that you would give a man who has just gotten out of the military and is trying to make that adjustment? For you, you had that sense of purpose with Stephanie and Kinsley. You had a strong church community. What would that look like for another man that maybe does not have that? How can they deal with that adjustment?
If you don't know what your purpose is, then your purpose is to find out what your purpose is. You can't. I think the downfall of a lot of people who get out and have real issues coming back into society or adjusting to society is that they just get stagnant. And it's like you got to keep going. You got to keep pushing. And like one of my favorite pieces of advice about that is that, like, especially it comes to like, a lot of veterans in one way or another might deal with like, like mental things like, depression, things like that, which are legitimate things. But one of my favorite things I've ever heard is that you have to remind yourself that your emotions are followers. They're not leaders.
That's powerful. And so there's a lot of men who are probably going to be listening to this that, like myself, who are civilians that have never served. Maybe they look back like me and wish they would have, but they've never had that experience like you have and others have as well. What lessons have you learned throughout serving our country, and even now, more specifically at the fire department, that civilians can apply to their lives just to become better men?
And I think that the biggest thing I've taken away from my service, whether it be military or fire, and something that I try to walk out every day in my own life, it is to be just that, to be a servant. Like the days where I'm the most in a funk or out of whack, like I come to the realization eventually where it's like, man, I've just been trying to serve myself today. And I really do think that, men specifically are designed to serve. I mean, Christ comes and he says, I did not come to be served, but to serve. And if our Savior, if his purpose was to serve, then you can about guarantee that we are probably intended to serve as well. And this is a little nerdy, but I have been listening to the Lord of the Rings on audio, and there's a quote in it that hit me so hard the other day, and it's like my favorite quote of all time now. But it's a quote from the character Aragorn, and he says, it's something his mother used to say to him, and it is, "I give hope to men, I keep none for myself."
Wow. That's powerful.
It's like my new favorite quote of all time. Like Tolkien was
That
just
might
a
be
genius.
mine. I'm going to have to write that down, and I'm going to have to put that in my back pocket because that is a good one.
Dude, the days that I feel the best and the most satisfied are the days in which I am being a servant husband, or being a servant father, or being a servant to the public, or being a servant to my friends.
So practically speaking, what can a man that's listening to this do tomorrow or next week even, where they can apply that principle of being a servant.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, hey, if the fire service interests you, see if there's a volunteer department around. If you just need to get out and serve, though, there's a soup kitchen in your town. Go feed some people. Go take your lawnmower and find a yard that looks overgrown, knock on the door and say, hey, can I cut this for free for you? I mean, I think that too often we think of service as like something that's big, right? But it kind of reminds me of like, back in, high school and youth group days, like those little random acts of kindness where if you go to your neighbor's house because their lawn's looking high and you say, hey man, let me cut your grass for you today. That might not mean a lot to you, but who knows what's going on in their life? Maybe they've got some crazy stuff going on and that's why they haven't cut it. And you just cutting their grass is a blessing to them.
Yeah.
So I think honestly, the practical way to go about it is like, don't think of something too crazy and big. Like start small. Walk somebody's shopping cart back to the grocery store for them.
See a need, fill a need. So what's next for you, man? So I've known you for quite a while and you've done a lot in your life and you just got a recent promotion. So congratulations on that. What's next for Ben, man? Like, where do you see yourself in the next 5-10 years?
Yes. That's a good question. I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you a vague answer.
Okay.
I see myself serving.
Okay.
I don't necessarily know what it's going to look like, but that's my plan.
Love it, man. And I think we can learn a lot from that. Well, brother, I appreciate you so much. It's been an honor having this conversation with you and hearing your story in great detail. I mean, people probably put it together. We've known each other for many years, but you and I have never had the time to sit down and really talk about these things, specifically just all the things that you've gone through. So it's been a blessing to me. I know it's going to be a blessing to other men. And I just wish you all the best, man. I know that with maintaining that mindset of a servant leader, like I've always known you to have, there can be nothing but blessings coming your way. And maybe it's not these self-fulfilling types of things, but I know that it does something to you and your mental state and emotional state and even your spiritual state when you're being that blessing to other people. So I'm grateful for you, brother. Appreciate your time. And we'll have to do this again very soon.
Yeah, for sure, man. I appreciate it. This was fun. And I'm excited to see where it goes, man. And it's like you said, like, even if this blesses one person, one person, 1 square foot at a time.
That's it, man. Appreciate you, dude.